right, to our next topic. As you will know, and I know every day, people laugh at me in this office as I go out to get my lunch or buy the newspaper, and I come back 3 minutes later without a mask because I can't buy anything without a mask in the shop. They've actually got a little tally board up on one of the whiteboards here at the office saying Sean forgets his mask again. I just find it a pain up the A, and I wonder, and have wondered for some time, just how effective mask wearing is in a shop. One of the first interviews we did on the platform was Michael Baker saying the nominal increase in safety of wearing masks in supermarket is just completely negligible. So is it time that the masks go? And what impact is mask wearing having on retail, which is the fundamental place where most of us are still mandated to have to wear a mask? To find out about all this, we are joined by the Chief Executive Officer of Retail New Zealand, and his name is Greg Harford. And Greg, welcome to the program. Lovely to see you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right. What are the rules? What's the law right now about wearing a mask in a retail setting or in a retail shop?
Yeah, well, I mean, the rules are pretty clear, actually. Legally, everyone is required to be wearing a mask if they go into a retail store. Where it gets confusing is that those rules don't apply in hospitality. So you can go into a crowded pub, you can go to a concert, you can go to an event, and there's no masking requirements. And at the same time that the government's insisting that everyone wears a mask in store, it's saying on one hand to retailers, don't worry about enforcing the rules because you're creating a potential risk of violence and aggression from your customers. And it's also created a giant loophole, really, the size of a Boeing 747 jumbo jet, where anyone can pretty much declare themselves to be exempt from wearing a mask with no medical basis whatsoever. So, what we're seeing really is a lot of concern in the community. Mask use is plummeting off a cliff, and when people are being asked to put a mask on, often they're really getting pretty narky with retail workers. So it's not a good place to be.
Look, it's happened to me a couple of times and I've had to fight the urge to get narky. I don't know what it is. It's a natural, maybe it's a Kiwi thing. It's a natural thing when someone who you don't perceive as having power over you asks you to comply with something. We do react emotionally in a certain way. But then I think about the retail worker who is down the bottom of the chain and literally just doing their job under difficult circumstances. And I, as I'm sure many other people, have witnessed some pretty nasty, intense incidents in retail settings about this. Is mask wearing having an impact on foot traffic and sales?
Yeah, we think it is. There's still a lot of customers who feel nervous about going out to retail stores. Masks are part of the reason for that. And there's a lot of, there are definitely segments of the community who are not going out at the moment because they're still very worried about COVID-19. Equally, you've got people who get upset with customers who are not wearing masks. You've got people who aren't wearing masks who get upset with people who are wearing them.
That's the only thing more annoying, Greg, is not the retail worker who says to wear a mask. The person who's not the retail worker who looks at you like, I don't know, you've had a bowel movement in the shop and gets all self-righteous with you.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who are just feeling, I think, particularly jumpy, particularly amped up at the moment. And, we're really calling for everyone to shop nice and just take a deep breath before you start climbing into either the retail worker or another customer, because you don't necessarily see the full picture. And but fundamentally, Sean, I think the point is really, when almost no one is wearing masks in retail stores, when the rules are essentially a joke, when the government has created a loophole that says anyone can, claim to be exempt for any reason, it's really time we came back and looked at these rules. And we've said this week, actually, we really think it's time to roll back the mask requirement and let people make their own decisions about whether they want their businesses to have a mask requirement for entry, and indeed to allow shoppers to choose whether or not they wear a mask when they go into store.
All right, so then this would be interesting, wouldn't it? So you're saying it should be optional. And I note some stores still have scan your QR code up, and I don't know if I've got one or not anymore. You're saying you would like shops to be able to say whether or not they want people to wear a mask? Individual shops.
I think that... Yeah, absolutely. Look, there will be some cases where it may be appropriate if there's a particular risk profile around a store where that business may want to continue asking their customers to mask up. Equally, there may be customers who, for whatever reason, think it's important to wear a mask and take an extra step to protect themselves. And look, I think you'll find that people will actually act pretty sensibly given the circumstances. But what's really not helpful is the ongoing rules that don't make sense and aren't enforced.
All right, can I ask you then, have you approached the government with this suggestion? And if so, what has their response been?
Yeah, we've been talking to government about masks for many months now. I think we're pretty frustrated because they have not moved or not been willing to move on the exemption issue, and they can't have it both ways. If they think masks are a really important part of combating COVID-19 and the spread of illness, then they need to have rules that are enforced. Equally, if they don't want them to be enforced, they really should just roll it back from being a mandatory requirement and recommend it if that's what they're saying.
All right. We're not, neither you or I are epidemiologists or medical practitioners or politicians, thank goodness. Do you think masks, but as a layperson who's obviously got some interest in this issue, do you think masks or the mandatory wearing of masks in retail is a massive bulwark against further spread of COVID-19, or do you think the returns public health-wise are rather marginal in that regard?
Well, we asked our members last week through a survey whether they and their staff thought the current rules were protecting them, and fewer than half of members think that the current rules are making a difference. And logically, Sean, it just doesn't stack up. If you're saying on one hand you can go to a crowded pub or a nightclub and you don't need to wear a mask because it's safe for you to do that, how can it conceivably then make sense that you go into a low-density retail environment where there might only be one other person in a shop and the government saying you need to wear a mask to prevent the spread of COVID-19? It's just actually not particularly logical.
Okay. I am not wanting to foment revolt here, but talk me through this. If I decide I have had enough of masks and I walk into the 7-Eleven across the road here and decide not to wear a mask, can they refuse to serve me or kick me out of the shop?
Well, absolutely. So you are required to be wearing a mask in a retail store unless you have an exemption. Individual businesses are free to set their own policies on top of that as well. Ultimately, shops are private property, and you do need to comply with the terms and conditions of entry, and you could be trespassed if you don't do that. All
right. I got to say, Wellington is quite compliant. I don't know about Auckland or other cities. Wellington seems compliant with the mask thing. You've put this call out. Would you expect any reasonable or timely response from the government on this?
Look, I think over the last several months, we've seen government drag its heels on issues around masks. I don't think it particularly wants to go here, but it is something we'll continue to be pushing for. We need to move to a world where we're taking away a point of friction with customers and giving people the responsibility really for making their own decisions about whether or not they want to mask up.
Masks aren't the only problem the retail sector's got, particularly if you like the high street retail area. We've come through a time where online has become the thing to do by necessity. And it strikes me that that accelerated a trend which was already happening, and the trend to online shopping. Does Main Street, high street retail, can it recover from that? How does it under the current circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting challenge that physical retailers have got, because the volume of online shopping in New Zealand, we think, more or less doubled around sort of May, June of 2020. Hasn't sort of really stepped back from that. So it's here to stay. We've seen a big systemic shift. So there's always going to be a place for high street retail. But the problem that high street retailers have got is that there are often shopping malls, and customers are increasingly going to those malls because it's convenient and easy for them to get to, and they can park there often for free. So, customer convenience is ultimately what drives their shopping decisions. And what we're seeing, I think, is a bit of a revisiting of those retail retail footprints in the high streets and indeed in the shopping malls to some extent, where they're going to become increasingly showrooms and they'll be focused more on experiences. So, there's plenty of clothes shops now where you can go and have a haircut or get a coffee while you're doing your shopping, and we'll probably see a bit more of that as retailers try and innovate to create reasons for people to come into store.
But we've also, of course, got a recession coming, and there are storm clouds gathering internationally, economic storm clouds gathering and storm clouds gathering here. Often the first thing to go in those circumstances are the luxuries, the nice-to-haves, the things you might go to the shop to buy. So that in some ways exacerbates the problems your sector has.
Yeah, it absolutely does, Sean. I think, though, what we are seeing at the moment is customers are perhaps trading down in terms of brand rather than making a decision not to purchase it all. So rather than perhaps buying the high-end luxury good, you might be buying a mid-range or a lower quality brand to fulfill the same purpose. We're definitely in a world, I think, where things have changed. Many customers will be saying that actually it's pretty essential that I can go out and buy my coffee. That's not a luxury anymore. That's a genuinely essential item for many people, and they will. It's true of things like clothing as well. I mean, they're discretionary in the sense that maybe you can wait another week before you make the purchase, but ultimately we do need to be clothed and fed and housed and have the necessities of life.
It can't all be bad news, though, because I also imagine that ground rents are dropping as our major cities are kind of hollowing out. That's got to be an upside for your average retailer who is renting their space.
Yeah, there's certainly some downwards pressure on rents, particularly in CBD locations, because customers aren't there at the moment. But at the same time, retailers are being faced with a myriad of other cost increases. So there's massive pressure on retailers to, try and maintain prices and stay competitive. But the cost of freight's gone up, cost of getting stuff around the country's increased, the cost of employing people has gone up massively and will continue to increase if the government pursues its fair pay agenda. There's a whole lot of things which drive cost. So rent is only one of those components, and ultimately, I think we are in a fairly significant inflationary environment, and that's going to continue.
Greg, I want to ask you finally, looping back to the issue we started on the masks. Would your members ever consider just saying we're not going to enforce masks? If the government won't move, we will. We're just going to say this is a nonsense and not comply.
Yeah. Well, in fact, many retailers have actually stepped away from trying to enforce the mask rules because it puts their team members in a really difficult position with customers who can be pretty abusive and aggressive. Ultimately, it's a police responsibility to enforce the rules. It's the police who have the power to issue fines and prosecute. But that's not a major priority. In the meantime, it is still a requirement that customers wear masks in store, and we'd certainly be asking people to make sure they're stepping up and shopping nicely and putting a mask on.
Oh, you're being very, very diplomatic, aren't you, Greg? And a wry smile from you.
It is a serious issue though, because nobody wants their staff to be put in a position where they're on the end of vitriol and abuse from customers who are really just in a bad state and in a dark place because of everything that's happened over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I hear you. Hey, Greg, thank you so much for your time this morning. Fascinating stuff, and I do hope the government listens to you and does something sensible rather than silly. That was Greg Harford. He is the CEO of Retail New Zealand and basically says, well, a whole lot of people not observing the mask thing, they want the government to drop the mask mandate for retail. It is putting retail workers at risk. It is uncomfortable for everyone. I'm kind of with him. Are you with him or not? You can